I want to talk to you about something that is not a source of joy, but that we can make into one. And that's something that's on sort of everybody's lips if you live in the United States or many places around the world, which is our politics. I want to talk about politics today, but I promise you I'm not going to be polarizing. On the contrary, what I want to do in the next half hour, 45 minutes, is talk to you about what I, as a behavioral scientist and as a serious practicing Catholic, believe is the solution where all of us can be part of the solution to the problem without losing our own core convictions as people of faith. What can we do to bring America and the world back together again, where it seems like nothing can be done? Now, I've been studying this for a long time. Besides just being a social scientist, I was the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C. for 11 years. I took 11 years out of the middle of my academic career. I was teaching at Syracuse for a long time. I left, I became the president of the American Enterprise Institute, which some of you might be aware is it's one of the oldest think tanks in the world in the heart of Washington, D.C. And this was during this time is when the current era of political culture wars really came up. So I had a front row seat to that. I had 310 employees at AEI. My job, like Father Dave's job, was not a daily intellectual activity as much as it was raising money. So being a think tank president sounds really brainy, like you're thinking in a tank. And I had to raise $50 million a year, build buildings, hire people, et cetera, and to adjudicate political relationships in Washington, D.C. It was a crash course in American politics. I left in 2019. That's when I came to Harvard and started this whole practice that I have of writing, speaking, and teaching about the science of happiness, behind which is nothing more than Catholic social teaching. Okay? I'm a spy at Harvard, basically, right? I'm your agent inside Harvard. But I never have gotten out of my mind, out of my consciousness, this problem that we have of political polarization, and none of us can because we're all paying attention and we're trying to be good citizens and we don't know what to do. So I want to give you my thoughts on what I think we can do and why this is the greatest period of opportunity for us as people of faith in America ever, at least in the past 100 years. Now, to begin with, let's not minimize the problem. Polarization is one of the three great storms that are driving down American happiness today. And let me give you a little bit of background on this. Studying American happiness, I look at a lot of big data sets about what the trends are in well-being in this country, and they're pretty much all bad. Going back to 1990, American happiness on average has been just ticking down and ticking down and ticking down. And there's two reasons for that. There's the climate reason and there's a weather reason. And I don't mean that literally. There's just metaphors. There's the climate for happiness, and then there's weather patterns. So here's the climate. The climate for happiness comes about because of four basic forces: faith, family, friends, and work. Those are the four habits of the happiest people, and they're all going in the wrong direction in the United States. The year I was born, 1964, which is further and further and further in the rearview mirror, but 1% of Americans said they had no religious affiliation. 1%. Today it's 33%. That is a huge event. Now, that's a cyclical thing. That's not like it's unprecedented in American history. You probably saw numbers like that around the time of the American Revolution. So there are periods where we wax and wane in terms of religious affiliation, but we're in the wane right now. That's a big downward force on happiness. Second is family life, and I don't have to tell you, because you see it all around you, that childbearing is decreasing, marriage rates are decreasing, marriage ages are increasing, and the truth is more and more people are living alone, without children, without spouses, and that's terrible for happiness. For the first time, starting 5 years ago, for the first time in American history, that most adults, people over 18, more than half were unmarried. That's unprecedented. Third is friendship. Now, for the first time since we've been keeping records, more than 50% of people under 30 say, no one knows me well. That's a loneliness problem. I mean, everybody knows you, but if nobody knows you well, you're lonely because you don't have any real friends. Your real friends know you. And last but not least is work, and the attitudes toward work have been going in the wrong direction as well. What brings joy from work? Two things: earning your success and serving others. That's it. Not money or power or privilege or position? No. And more people, young people in particular, talk about their jobs and say, it's just a job. There's a lot of survey research that shows that. That's the climate for happiness, and that's a problem. And if we want to turn that around, what do we need to do? More faith, more family, more friendship, more work as a vocation. That's what we got to do. That's how you change the climate. But then there's storms that have been pushing American happiness down. And these are dramatic events, and there's been 3. The first was between 2008 and 2010. At first, when I started seeing the data, big downdraft in happiness in America. It wasn't coming back. I thought, yeah, it's because of the financial crisis. People graduating from college, not getting jobs, living with mom. Wasn't it? 2008 was when the first iPhone was delivered. 2009 is when the first social media apps were put on the iPhones. 2010 is when the first dating apps went on the iPhones. That's what happened. We started to intermediate social life with electronics, which is leading into the family and friendship problems I talked about before. Big downdraft. Second was what happened during the coronavirus epidemic, which was, the coronavirus epidemic was bad. The response was worse. It was a complete scandal how the coronavirus epidemic was dealt with in most parts, many parts of the world, in most parts of the United States. Why? Because we have permanent deficits in social life that we see from young people who never actually attended class when they were in high school or college, never went to work in person, and the result is that they're, as far as we can tell, permanently socially stunted, leading to this loneliness that we're talking about here. That's what increased the rates of depression and anxiety, and they didn't go back down. But here's the one, the slow burning hurricane, and that's politics. That's politics. What's happened quite uniquely during our lifetime? A climate of polarization, largely driven by populist politics and political activism, to no small extent on college campuses, where a small group of people have been manipulating the political system and the activist climate for very specific reasons. That's what I want to talk about. Now, let me tell you a little bit as a social scientist about what's being rewarded in politics and activism. And I see a whole lot of both. You all see the politics because you turn on TV and you read the newspaper. But on many campuses, not this one, thank God, but on many campuses you see a supercharged version of the polarization in politics that's coming out of the mouths of professors and administrators and campus activists every single day. That talks about grievance, that talks about identity, that talks about anger and fear and sadness, which are the vehicular emotions on many campuses today. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. That's what our students are hearing again and again and again. Who is responsible for that? Here's the answer. And this is abundantly clear in all of the best social science research that we've been able to generate. The people who are responsible for campus activism and the current political climate, right and left, I don't care what your politics are, but that are the bitter rhetoric that we see, are people that are called dark triads. Now, I realize that sounds like a Batman movie. It's a designation of 3 personality characteristics that you find together in 7% of the population. Okay, 7%. This work comes from a psychologist at Columbia named Scott Barry Kaufman, who's the world's leading expert on this. 1 in 14 Americans has this. You've met these people. Where you find them all together is in 2 places: politics and activism and prisons. Seriously, here's what a dark triad is. It's to be above the population average across 3 dimensions of personality: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Narcissism, it's all about me. Machiavellianism, I'm willing to hurt you to get what I want. Psychopathy, psychopathic traits, I feel no remorse or empathy about hurting you. Now, that doesn't mean that you're an axe murderer, marauding through the streets. It just means you're above average on all 3 of these tendencies, above average. If you're above average and you're extremely intelligent, you have a golden opportunity in America today to go into political media, politics, or campus activism. Those are your golden opportunities, because in this kind of environment, these people are rewarded. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I see this as, look, I have my political opinions and so do you. My political opinions are pretty much your political opinions. But that doesn't mean I have to stand idly by and say this is normal. It isn't normal, and it's not okay, and it's not good for our country, and it's not good for our kids. So I want to talk about, notwithstanding our political views, what we can actually do about this to make it better. That's what I really want to talk about. Now, when I'm looking at this, I remember first starting to see this roiling phenomenon in politics and activism, which is accelerated by social media, absolutely. That's like the direct hypodermic injection into the ideological veins of America, is Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. I started seeing this in 2014. I was running the think tank in those days, and I was really kind of aware of these new sort of trends of greater ideological polarization. This is before the 2016 election. But I was starting to notice this, and I read an article in one of the social science journals that I follow, academic journals that I follow, and it was by 3 psychologists at Northwestern University who were writing about a phenomenon called motive attribution asymmetry. Now, that sounds like a fancy thing, right? Fancy words, simple concept, fancy words, that's how we get tenure, right? But, don't tell, it's our secret, right? This is friends, it's okay. Anyway, so motive attribution asymmetry, here's what it is. When you have an implacable hostility and conflict between 2 people or 2 groups, can't be resolved, usually it's because of an error, a communication error. And here's what it's based on. Both sides believe, I love and they hate. I love, now that's an error because in a conflict, you can't have both sides simultaneously loving and hating. One side is wrong or the other, right? Usually both, according to these data, according to these studies on this phenomenon. But this explains almost everything. If you talk to people in civil wars, they'll always say, I love my country, but they hate what we stand for. They hate what this country stands for. This explains a lot of what's going on in the Middle East. It explains what happened in Rwanda in 1994 with the genocide. It happened, the Balkan Civil War. It happens in divorces, by the way. This is a really interesting thing because when you look at how divorces proceed, people who just can't work out their marital conflict, and if you're married, you're in conflict. That's just part of what it is, man. I mean, I have a special case. I'm married to a Spaniard, so that's like, conflict is just like orange juice in the morning. But anyway, it's normal. The problem is that when you get into a pattern of communication in which you're convinced that you're the one who still loves but the other person hates, and that you're the loving person dealing with hatred all the time. And what you find in couples that are on their way to divorce court is that both will say the same thing. Like, I still love, but she's so full of hatred. And she'll say, what are you talking about? I'm the one who loves, and he's the one who's full of hatred. And that motive attribution asymmetry will lead you all the way to divorce, or civil war, or internal conflict, or America today. So this article in 2014, here's why it got my attention. They were talking a lot about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and they found a measurement of motive attribution asymmetry. And they showed in the end of the article that American politics in 2014, between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, had the same intensity of motive attribution asymmetry as the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. And I thought to myself, that's bad. Nothing good coming here. So I thought, I wonder if it's true. I mean, I want proof. At least I want to see it with my own eyes. So I was doing kind of what I do now. I'm on tour most of the time, speaking, and I was doing that a lot then too, but I was doing more ideological audiences and politically oriented events. So the night after I read that article, I happened to be in Manchester, New Hampshire. I was speaking at an event, at a conservative activist event. And by the way, that's not exclusively what I do. I'll talk to anybody. Anybody wants to talk about ideas, I'm into it. I'll go to left-wing campuses and right-wing activist groups. I don't care, as long as somebody wants to talk about ideas. But this happened to be a conservative activist outfit. There were 600 conservative activists in the audience. It was during the Tea Party era. So they were like dressed up in Minuteman costumes. It was a thing, man. And there was open arms, And I got there a little early, which I usually do. And I remember it really, really distinctly because I took at the time, my young son, Carlos, with me to that event, just because he liked to come on tour with me sometime. When my kids were young, they would travel with me sometimes for these speaking events. So I really, really remember it. And it was a thrill for him because the program was 15 presidential candidates and me. Obviously, they all were vying to become the presidential Republican candidate in the 2016 election. And it was all the people that you know. Right before me was Ted Cruz. Right after me was Donald Trump. And my son, young guy, he got his picture taken with Donald Trump, and it was really fun for him, and et cetera. So when I get there a little early to get the lay of the land, I like to, listen to what the other speakers are saying. And they were doing what politicians always do. I don't care if you're liberal or conservative. They always do the same thing. You get in front of an entirely sympathetic audience, entirely sympathetic, and then you say, you're right in all the things that you think. And the people who aren't here are stupid and evil and hate America. That's what you do in presidential politics, or pretty much any level of politics today. You make sure that there's nobody in the crowd who disagrees with you, and then you act as if you're standing up courageously to the people with whom you disagree, even though they're not there. That's how politics works. That's how good sound bites work. And sure enough, they were basically throwing raw rhetorical stakes out into the audience the whole time, right? So I thought to myself, okay, this is a good opportunity for me to test this hypothesis I just read about. But furthermore, it's an opportunity for me to do something maybe a little different. What can I say that these people can't say? Oh, I know. I can say anything I want. They can't. They need votes. I need no votes. So my time came, and I was giving a talk about, it's a totally non-memorable speech I was giving, something about economic policy. But here's the memorable moment. In the middle of the talk, I actually stopped and I said, I was listening to the talks before, and the speakers before me were talking about how much you love America and how the people who aren't here, liberals, don't love America. And I want you to remember something. Your neighbors who happen to be politically left-wing and family members, your sister-in-law, they're not stupid and evil. They're just Americans who disagree with you. They're citizens, just like you. And if you want them to agree with you, which should be your goal should be persuasion as opposed to insults, you can only do it with one method, and that's not insults, because nobody's ever been persuaded by insults in history. The only way you can do that is with love. And it was not an applause line. No, but there was an applause line. It just wasn't for me. See, right after I said that, this lady, they were having fun, so this is not an insult. She yells at the lady in the audience, yells out, actually, my neighbors are stupid and evil. Right? Here are left-wing neighbors, right? And that was not, again, I wasn't offended by that because, it was a festive environment. But here's the reason I bring that up. Because, my friends, that's mode of attribution asymmetry right there in a nutshell. What the politicians were saying and what the people were responding. And when you have that, you don't have reconciliation. You don't have a solution. Things are only going to get worse. And furthermore, I saw in my mind's eye in that moment the solution. See, my brain at that moment went to Seattle. Weird, right? Why would my brain go to Seattle? Because it's my hometown. It's where I grew up. Seattle, as you may know, is not Steubenville, Ohio. Seattle is the most secular left-wing city in America. It is. My parents, my mother was an artist and my father was a professor in the most left-wing city in Seattle. What do you think my family politics were growing up? They're not my politics. I was the odd man out. I was the only one who thought differently. Like, you remember that old sitcom Family Ties? I was Alex P. Keaton, right? I was the weird kid who, liked capitalism. Strange. I was also the only Catholic in my family at 16. I was a convert, pro-life, And so my parents thought it was dropped on my head. I don't know. And really, I remember one time having a conversation with my mother, and she was like all silent and being really weird. And I said, Mom, spit it out. What's on your mind? She said, Dad and I are very worried about you. I said, really? I mean, what could it be? What could it be? She says, I want you to be completely honest with me, and I want you to know we're going to love you either way. I said, what is it? She said, have you been voting for Republicans? All right. So that's them and this is me. But let me tell you something about my parents. They were not stupid and evil. They were great parents. They raised me with Christian values. They raised me to love education, to believe in the radically equal dignity of all people. The man I am today is the man that my father was. And I'm proud of that. I don't care that they voted differently than me. I don't care. And that's the most important thing, because the bonds of love could not be broken by differences of political affiliation. They taught me that, and that's true. And that still must be true today if anything is going to get better in this country. So here's the point. If you want to save this country, you need to be a little offended when people on your side insult people on the other side. You see, that's moral courage. My dad taught me that. Here's more. See, the current activist environment, and politicians on both sides will tell you this. You know what moral courage is? Standing up to the people with whom you disagree. Everybody's so courageous about calling out the people with whom they disagree. That's what the politicians were doing on that stage in Manchester, New Hampshire. That's what the lefty activists are doing on my campus, standing up where there's nobody who disagrees to the people with whom they disagree and calling it moral courage. Nonsense. That's free speech. I'm in favor of that. But moral courage, real moral courage, according to my dad, was standing up to your own side on behalf of those with whom you disagree, especially when they're not there. That's moral courage. And that's scary. Let me tell you why that's scary. You know what's not scary? Standing up to people who aren't there. You know what's scary? Standing up to your own tribe. And there's a reason for that. There's a neurobiological reason for why that's scary. Your brain was evolved for you to live in small bands of 30 to 50 individuals in a very, very hostile and dangerous world. The Pleistocene, our brain is still habituated to approximately 250,000 years ago, when our brain in its current form started to exist as it currently does exist. And that had a console of tissue on the inside creating your emotions called the limbic system. Among the parts of the limbic system exists a little tiny piece about the size of the end of your index finger called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. What does it do? It makes you afraid of social exclusion. It makes you afraid of losing your kin relationships. Why? Because if you're not afraid of it, you're going to make all kinds of dumb errors. If you weren't afraid of losing the people that you loved, you'd be fired and divorced and friendless in a week because of your own actions. You need to be afraid of that. That's important. Now, 250,000 years ago, if you lost your tribe, you'd walk the frozen tundra and die alone. And you don't want that. We don't live in those times, to be sure, but we still have the same hardware. And so we're still bound by the same urges and fears and tendencies. And that's why people don't want to stand up to the activists on their own side who are saying outrageous things about their kin. When somebody can stand up and insult my mother and I don't say a single thing, even though that person is a stranger, it's because my dorsal anterior cingulate cortex is saying, you're going to walk the savannah and die alone if you say something, but I'm not. And I need to get out of my animal impulse space and into my moral aspiration space, which God also gave me. And that's what we need to do, my friends. That's what I want to talk to you about, is how to get into the space of moral aspiration and not to be managed by your dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and stand up to the people who are insulting the people with whom you disagree inappropriately and in an unchristian way. How do we do that? That's the trick. That's the trick. So when I saw that night in Manchester, New Hampshire, I actually tested it the next night. I think I was in Lexington, Kentucky the next night. You can see I travel a lot. I'm like Johnny Cash, you know? I walk the line. and I said, I want to do a little test. I said, I asked for a show of hands. I'm going to do it now, so I promise I'm not going to break the fourth wall anymore after this. But I want you to vote. How many of you love somebody with whom you disagree politically? I'm going to round that off to 100%. The rest of you are on your phones. So, yeah. Okay. You get what I'm saying here. The solution's in our hands. The question is, how do we undertake it? How do we execute? How do we get this done? Because I'm not telling you it's easy. Now, the beginning of the solution to this, where each one of us can solve this problem and bring the country back together again with our own lives, starts with knowledge. Knowledge is power. That's the reason I explained a little bit about your limbic system to you, because that kind of knowledge helps you understand that psychology is just biology. And so the more that you understand about what's actually going on, the better equipped you are to stand up against your animal tendencies and shove yourself right into your moral aspiration space. That's what knowledge will actually do for you. That's why college education is so critically important. So you don't just follow your impulses. You're the person you want to be, as opposed to the person you feel. It's a great thing. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on and what we're feeling and why it's so hard to do. People will say, looking at the current political environment in the United States and many countries around the world, there's a problem of anger. We have an anger problem. Like, we're so angry with each other all the time. And there's plenty of anger. I mean, and turn on cable television at 8 o'clock at night, and you're going to see, people robotically, angrily debating each other, for sure. But that's actually not the problem. There's very interesting research that shows that anger, which is a hot, basic negative emotion. There's only 4 negative emotions that your brain produces: anger, disgust, fear, and sadness. Anger, which is largely mediated by the amygdala of your brain and your limbic system, this almond-shaped bilateral tiny little organ. It's your fight or flight. It gives you a fight or flight response autonomically to a perceived threat. That's what it comes down to. Anger toward another person says, I care what you do or think, and I want it to change. Care is the important thing with anger. Research shows very clearly that anger and divorce are uncorrelated. That's great news for me. I mean, that's great news for me. The secret to my 34 years of very, very happy marriage is a lack of correlation between anger and divorce. That's what it is, right? That's not arguing and getting angry isn't going to get you into divorce court. No. It's when you take another one of those 4 basic negative emotions and mix it in with anger. See, anger's hot, and when it's hot, it's going to be okay. The problem is to turn it ice cold by taking disgust. Disgust is another basic negative emotion that what it does is it alerts you to pathogens. Disgust is mediated in the part of the limbic system called the insular cortex, also known as the insula. Has one job: to tell you that something might poison you and kill you. That's what disgust is for. The disgust reflex is toward things that are dead or rotten because they're more likely to contain bacteria that could be really harmful to you. Before the advent of vaccines and antibiotics, all you had was your insular cortex to keep you from eating something poisonous that could kill you. Saved your life again and again and again. That's why certain things seem disgusting to you that are not disgusting to other animals. Some of you have a dog. Dogs are wonderful. They're incredibly disgusting. They're very disgusting animals. It's like, he's licking the floor. It's licking the floor. Why? And why do you, and you have a little kid, and the kid is like, why can't I lick the floor? And the reason is because your kid does not have natural antibiotics in his saliva that will neutralize the germs that are on the floor. But your dog does. That's why your dog isn't disgusted by licking the floor, but you are. Because you have a natural difference in your insular cortex against the pathogens that you don't have any defenses toward. Psychology is biology, friends. Now, here's my point. That's great. The problem is when we misuse disgust and turn it toward other people. Here's how you do it. If you want to be a dark triad leader, here's how you use disgust to manipulate people to your devices. Here's how you do it. You say, those people, what they think is disgusting. That's literally how you do it. That's great because what it does is it flips on the switch of the insular cortex, and people start to see other individuals, even other people of their family, as a pathogen. That's what you say. When some leader tells you that somebody else's opinions are disgusting, they're manipulating your insula. A better way to do it, more powerful way to do it, if you're a dictator, a demagogue, is to refer to a certain group of people in the population as rats or cockroaches. And that I didn't just make up. The Hutus in Rwanda had a word in their indigenous language for Tutsis, which meant cockroach. Why? They were trying to, as leaders, as demagogic leaders, turn the Hutus murderously against the Tutsis the way that you are in your own house. That's how you do it. The insular cortex will take over your brain. You'll panic when it gets turned on. That's why the Nazis referred to the Jews as rats, because they were carriers of disease to spawn a sense of disgust. When you take anger, because we disagree, with disgust, which is largely injected into the political mainstream by media, politicians, and activists, you mix them together and you get a complex emotion called contempt. Contempt is the conviction of the worthlessness of another human being. Now, you know, fellow Christians, no one is worthless. 0% of the population is worthless. But if you want to feel like somebody's worthless, be angry and add in in disgust, and you'll get contempt, which is the conviction of the worthlessness of another person. And to that person, you will do almost anything. You will say almost anything, you will dismiss them in almost any way, and now you're putty in the hands of the dark triads. That's how it works. And that's all of us, my friends. I don't care how strong you are, that has happened to you because your brain is your brain. And that's what we actually have to fight. How do you do it? How do you fight contempt? You know, I've been asking about this for years and years and years because, you know, this whole line of thinking started in 2014. In 2019, I wrote a book about it, and I've been asking people about this again and again. You know what people always say? You want to make things better? You know what we need? We need more tolerance. We need to be more tolerant of each other, right? We need to be civil. We need civility in this country, and that's garbage. You know, if I tell you, I mean, I have a little company. If I tell you that the people who work for me tolerate me, that's a human resource problem, right? You know, it's like, or if I tell you that Esther and I are civil to each other, you know that we're cooked. Like, oh yeah, no, hi honey, I'm glad you're civil to me today. That's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm looking for with my employees and colleagues and my friends, and especially not my family. I'm looking for something else. You know what I'm looking for? Love. That's what I'm looking for. Now, what is it? What does that mean? Nice feelings? No. Thomas Aquinas told us this, channeling Aristotle, which Thomas Aquinas did continuously throughout his career. To love is to will the good of the other. That's what he said in the Summa Theologia. That was his definition of love. And this is important, right? Because the standard of love is not to feel anything. Martin Luther King said this in a sermon about the Bible verse that I'm clearly homing in on right now. Matthew 5:44. Civility is an insufficient standard, as is tolerance. The standard that we need was given to us by the great transgressor, and who transformed human society single-handedly in about the year 32 AD, when he gave the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that you should love your friends and hate your enemies, but today I give you a new teaching: love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Boom! Right? Boom! Now, Jesus didn't say, as Martin Luther King said in a sermon on Matthew 5:44 that he gave on November 17th, 1957 at the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Jesus didn't say to like your enemies, because to like your enemies is a sentimental something, said Dr. King. He said to love your enemies, because to love your enemies is a commitment and a decision and a practical thing, and the only way to redeem your enemies. Here's the point. Each one of us has an opportunity, notwithstanding our feelings, to love the people with whom we disagree, and to do so publicly. Not only do we have the opportunity, we have the obligation as Catholic people to do that. And we are the solution, because we know it's true. Now, I can be very practical about this and a real public policy guy and do a lot of political science for you. And if I did, here's what I would say. Love your enemies as a message. Where did it lead? It led to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, which has a lot of problems about it that led to scientism and all the things that we see today. But here's what it did that was really, really good. It moved our entire society, the West, AKA in politically incorrect language, Christendom, from a society of coercion where might makes right to a society of persuasion where I want to convince you of something. And the only way that you can do that is by loving your enemies, by willing their good, notwithstanding your feelings. And that came straight from the mouth of our Lord and Savior. That's why Christendom won. That's why the West is the West and the rest are the rest. That's what happened. So if we don't believe this teaching, guess what we are? We're the rest. And that's where we're going. We're going to the rest of the world. Just some other place, just some other country. That's why you and I, as Christian people, we have a responsibility to live up to the Sermon on the Mount in American politics today, no matter how we feel about the politics and the politicians. This is much bigger than politics. It's the opportunity of our lifetime and why we were born. That's what I believe. So how? I need to be practical about that. I need to be really practical about this. As a scientist, how do we do this? How do we use our brains to actually make this possible? Because it's hard. I'm telling you, it's hard. I have strong feelings. I have hard feelings about what's going on my campus and what's going on in our culture. Very strong feelings about it. And it's very easy for me to fall into patterns of contempt. It really is. Those people, what they think is disgusting, yeah. But I can't do it. There's a biblical injunction to me to not do that. If I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, I can't do that. So what do I do instead? What do I do when I feel hatred? And the answer is just what Jesus said, is to love my enemies no matter how I feel. Interestingly, there's psychological literature that shows you how to do it. Here's the best way to do it. And then I'm going to give you some more practical advice, by the way. But just as an aside, as an intellectual aside, researchers have done this. Social psychologists have created a method for acting the way that you want to be no matter how you feel, doing something called the as-if principle. This was actually originated from William James, the creator of social psychology, professor at Harvard in 1890, in his Principles of Psychology. Act like the person you want to be no matter how you feel, and your feelings will follow behind. This is so different than modern life. My students think that they have to act the way that they feel. They can't be inauthentic. And I say to them, as a scientist, your life will be terrible unless you're inauthentic a lot of the time. Because you should be the person you want to be, not the person who's inside you. Look, if I were the person that was inside me a lot, I would not have been married 34 years. I would not have been employed as long as I have. I would have had a lot of problems in my life. Instead, I have the self-discipline to say, that's the man I want to be, and then acting like that man. And here's the interesting part. Your feelings follow. I'll give you an example of this. Think of a time in your own life when you felt something but acted a different way, and it had a weird outcome, and you turned into that wonderful person that you wanted to be. I'll give you an example in my own life. The first book I ever wrote that anybody ever really paid attention to was in 2006. Until then, I was a very conventional academic. I was writing books that nobody ever read because they were unbelievably boring, and turgid, and footnotes, and the whole. And in 2006, I wrote a very boring book, but it got the news cycle in just the right way. It happens to academics sometimes when you write about something and then it becomes kind of hot. And what happened to me is I was writing about charitable giving, and I'm talking about the differences between charitable giving between conservatives and liberals. And what I showed, using empirical data, is that politically left people in America, they think they give the most, but they don't. The conservatives give by far the most. And I just pointed this out, and I talked about why. It has everything, by the way, it has nothing to do with politics, it has everything to do with faith. Conservative people tend to be more religious, and it's the religious part that actually does this. I talked about blood donations and money and time, et cetera. And I just published the book, and it had mathematical appendix and the whole deal. And President Bush read it, and I got called to the White House, and it made news. This is when the president calls an author to the White House, and there's reporters there and the whole thing. And suddenly I was on every news show and every radio show, and it changed my career permanently. Permanently changed my career. after that, I started writing more commercial books, and my life has been much more public than it was in the past. But here's the weird thing that happened after I published that book. People started reading it, and they started emailing me, just because it's very easy, as an academic, it's very easy to get our emails. And so total strangers, they read the book and they're like, oh, it's so true, and my grandma taught me how to give, and it really changed my life, and I'm so much happier. Or people who didn't like it because they felt politically attacked, which was not my intent, would write to me and tell me I was a terrible, evil, conservative stooge, right? And that was extremely disconcerting, and I was very defensive about that, because now, I mean, I get attacked every day. It's okay. But then I didn't have a thick skin at all, because I was just a kind of a tender college professor, and I didn't know that there's enemies, effectively. So I get an email from a guy about a month after the book comes out, and he had read the book, and it starts like this: Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. Now, that's not a great way to start email. But I'm a good sport. I'm going to read it. And so I'm reading everybody's email. It's like a Wednesday afternoon in my office at Syracuse. And this email is 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read it. So I'm just like plowing through it. It's incredibly insulting, and I'm very defensive. It's like chapter and verse. Every mistake he thought I made. The columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. I mean, like that. But a weird thing happened. About 10 minutes into reading this email, I realized that this thing I was feeling, gratitude. Why? He read my book, It's like, nobody reads my books. I didn't write them. I thought anybody was going to read them. Wrote it to get tenure or something. I don't know. And so I thought to myself, I remember at that time, it was an afternoon thing. I thought, I'm going to tell him how I'm feeling right now. Not because I'm ever going to talk to him. I'm never going to meet him. I'll never hear from him again, because why not? So I write back to him, Dear so-and-so, I know you hated the book and you hate me and it's bad and I'm bad and everything's bad. You were very clear. But you read my whole book, and it took me 2 years. My whole soul was poured into that book. You read every word. I'm really grateful to you for that. Thank you. Send. And then I go back to work. I'll never hear from that guy again. No. 15 minutes later, ding, his email's back up. I'm like, now maybe he wants to kill me. I don't know. I mean, it's like this. I'm very apprehensive to open the email at this point. Here's what it said. Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. Like, what? What? I mean, what happened? What happened was he was just angry and acting out and sent an email, probably figuring nobody would actually read it, and he got a friendly response back from the author thanking him for taking the time to read his book. And it changed his heart. Now maybe he's such a psychopath that it didn't change his heart. It changed my heart. Because during that 15 minutes, I said, that's the man I want to be. That response, which I did by accident, is the person that I want to be. And I could have gone either way, and I felt good about that. My heart was on fire. I prayed a little bit about it. I said, thanks, Lord. Thanks for helping me to do the right thing when I might not have. Now, I never had dinner with that guy, because I'd probably be chained to a pipe in his basement right now, right? Yeah. Is that too edgy for Franciscan? Anyway, so it's a great thing about it. It's like this for Protestant school people are like, what'd he say? We like jokes. Anyway, so, but I learned something that day, that you have this opportunity. You have this opportunity. So let me give you, if you want to join me in this task, if you want to join me in this apostolate of saving our country, I want to give you 3 assignments. The first thing I want to do is give you what's not the assignment. Here's not the assignment. Agree more. No. Agreement in the world of ideas is complete mediocrity. I love competition. In elections, it's called democracy. I want more than one candidate on the ballot. I don't want Cuba. I want to go to the supermarket and have more than one brand. I want competition in the economy. That's called capitalism. I'm all about it, right? And in the world of ideas, One of the fundamentals of a free society is the competition of ideas. Don't agree when you don't agree. You don't need to agree. We don't need to disagree less in this country. We need to disagree better. Because that's one thing. There's nothing wrong with your opinions. The question is the love in your heart as you share your opinions. And so these are the three things I really want to talk to you about. Number one is it's time to stand up to your own side. Why? Because somebody is manipulating your insular cortex. They are. They're manipulating your brain. They're doing it on purpose. They are dark triads. You're in danger when a dark triad on your side of the political aisle is trying to make you angry at your sister-in-law or your fellow citizens. It's not right. Shouldn't be done. And so the way to do that is not to, write an angry letter to them. You don't need to show contempt to them. No. You just need to turn it off. Turn off your side. Stop reading that columnist. Turn off that news network. Get rid of the social media that's firing you up. Why? Because it's hurting you. It's injecting a drug into your veins. And the best way that you can rebel is by denying the nutrients that it actually needs to survive. So that's an easy one. Actually, it's kind of not an easy one because we're sort of addicted. But your life is going to get better, and you're going to get a lot of time back if you do that. It's been real good for me. And I recommend it to you. Now, harder is actual missionary work. I mentioned this yesterday to students. No, I mentioned it last night, actually, about missionary work. I have missionaries on both sides of my family, evangelical Protestant missionaries on both sides of my family. My grandfather always joked, as I mentioned last night, that no one has ever said, great news, missionaries on the porch. Nobody's ever said that, right? Because nobody wants that. But missionaries, despite that, are joyful. They're so joyful. I've known a lot of Mormon missionaries in my life, and they get their doors slammed in their face all the time. I worked for a guy in California for a long time. I loved him. He was a wonderful man. And he had done his Mormon mission in France. Can you imagine being a Mormon missionary in France? The rejection that you'd face? And he said, yeah. I said, did you ever convert anybody? He's like, no. And he said, but it was such a great experience. Like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And the answer is this. It's so joyful to have the truth. It's so joyful to bring the truth to people who need it. It's just great. It's wonderful work, and it's true. That's why you're here at Franciscan. That's why you're involved with this great school, is because having the truth is a joyful thing. And sharing the truth is an even more joyful thing. That's why mission work, even in the face of rejection, is a joyful thing. And that's how we need to treat what I'm talking about here right now. Loving your enemy is the ultimate apostolate in a world of hurt, and that's a joyful thing if we treat it as such. But the only way we're going to do it is by running toward contempt with open arms, full of love. It's the only way we're going to do it. And that means looking for trouble. That means getting out of the bubble. Not only hanging out with other people who are just like us in this room, who have the same basic values, the same basic religious beliefs, but going where people don't have it, because mission work doesn't work when people don't need mission. Look for contempt. Look for dissension. Look for hatred, and show love notwithstanding your feelings. At first it's hard, and then it feels so good. Then it's a wonderful thing. Making a commitment to doing that on social media and in your personal relationships and at your Thanksgiving table next month when Aunt Marge won't shut up about the president. Bringing love where there actually would be dissent under those circumstances. That's number two. And number three is this. Number three is gratitude. The one thing it seems that both sides politically in this country they agree on nothing except one thing. This country is a crummy country in decline. That's the one thing both sides seem to agree on. Everything used to be better in the past, and everything's crummy now, and everything's all screwed up and upside down, and I'm the only one who can fix it. Well, you know what? Tell an immigrant, like my wife. Tell Americans who are here by choice. Tell them that. Why are they, look, I get it. There's a lot of trouble with the way that we're doing that system, but they all want to come here for a reason. We should be grateful to be here in the first place. This is the greatest country we could possibly imagine. It's imperfect, which is why my remarks are here today. But it's this hubris, this ingratitude. Now, we're wired for ingratitude. I get it. We're not wired for gratitude. Homo sapiens have a negativity bias. That's how your ancestors passed on their genes, not by being grateful and happy, but by being suspicious and ungrateful and afraid. That's how they passed on their genes, right? And me too. I'm an ungrateful wretch. I found myself saying 2 weeks ago, you know what I found myself saying? First class in United Airlines has really gone downhill. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. But I gotta be realistic here and an honest person. I don't wanna move. I love this country. And the more that I show that, the more that love in my heart is gonna extend to the other people who share this country with me, notwithstanding the differences that they have. Gratitude is a balm of Gilead. It's something that we can all use. And if we remember that, our lives get happier. Now, let's leave it on the note of mission, and we're gonna have a couple of minutes for whatever's on your mind. But let's leave it on the note of what I'm suggesting here, which this truly is mission work. This is applied Catholic apostolate. This is service missionary work in a hurting world, in a hurting country. Esther and I, we do marriage prep for every few months for couples that are engaged at a local Catholic retreat center run by the Legionaries of Christ in Bethesda, Maryland. It's called Our Lady of Bethesda. And they got 36 or 40 couples, and we have a little thing that we do about how men and women are different and how men and women, to live together happily, they need to treat each other differently and understand each other's differences. And, it's great. It's a great thing that we do. And before we leave, we go to the chapel, we offer up our words to God, and we pray a little bit, because there's a chapel there. And why wouldn't you check in and say hello to the body of Christ? And Esther alerted me to a sign over the door in this chapel. And it wasn't a sign when you're coming into the chapel. It was actually a sign when you're going out. You're supposed to see it when you're leaving the chapel and going and getting in your car and driving home. Here's what it said: you're now entering the mission field. It's good advice, right? When you leave church, you're entering the mission field. You're not in the mission field when you're in church. It's when you get in your car and somebody cuts you off, mission field. It's when you get to Aunt Marge at the Thanksgiving table, mission field. You get to work and somebody says something unbelievably ignorant and stupid, mission field. You boot up Facebook and there's all that stuff on there where people on your side are insulting your neighbors and your friends and your family, mission field. That's what it really comes down to. So if we really want to take this out to the world and be the Catholics that we purport to be, and I do, then let's pretend that the sign is over this door. Together, we're a community. Together, we believe in this. Together, we love each other and we're strong. But when we leave, let's remember that when we leave Franciscan University in this beautiful retreat, that we're entering the mission field. And we can save America with these ideas. God bless you and thank you.